Hi. Thanks for coming.
Hello, good afternoon. As you see, this will be a really easy job for me because my guest can do it all on his own. Imran, it's great to have you here in Prague. It's like a dream come true for me, and I think for a lot of people who are here, we know you by your voice, which is very intimate. We listen to your interviews, to your analysis, we read your texts, we are reading your media, and now you're here. So how do you feel in Prague, actually?
It feels wonderful. Thank you so much to Michaela and the team at Vogue for inviting me. I was saying to Veronica earlier, the last time I was in Prague was 29 years ago. And I came with a backpack and one of my closest friends from university, and we were staying in a student hostel somewhere near Wenceslas Square. I drove by there very quickly this morning, so I'm really excited to be back. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming.
You're very welcome. I think you will see Prague changed big time. We're gonna talk about three things, and change is gonna be in all of them. We're gonna talk about the most interesting things in fashion and luxury now, which is like a great topic. We're gonna talk also about changing landscape of media, not just fashion media, but media as such. And also I would like to start with the story of developing a blog to a global media, which is your personal story. It's a great success story, so let's start with that. There's a lot of people here who write or photograph or do other creative things for media. Maybe some of them try to do their own media, their own blogs, and they would like to dream big, so let's inspire. When you were starting, why did you want to start your own media, not just write for the others?
Well, when I started writing, I actually had zero background in media. I didn't really know that much about fashion, and I didn't understand all that much about technology either. So let's just say I was a real amateur. It's hard to remember it now because, you know, back in 2006, the way media worked was so different. So the year that I started writing BOF, it actually started in 2006, and it was just a personal blog. You know, it was like a private blog. I didn't call it anything. It was actually just a personal creative outlet, and I just left a job in management consulting, and I was immersed in this new industry, trying to understand it. So really my way of understanding it was by writing things down. And this was before the iPhone came out, before Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. I mean, before all of the social media, it was really blogs that were the first type of social media. And I met someone who introduced me to blogging, and I thought, well, I'll just give it a go, you know? And so I had left this career, quite serious business career. So I kept this personal blog for myself. And then when the company I was trying to set up, it was an incubator for young fashion designers. It didn't work out. I had to shut it down. So after I shut it down, I didn't really have anything else to do. So I took the password off my blog and I created a little banner in PowerPoint, and I called it The Business of Fashion. So, I know it seems hard to remember what it was like back then, but nobody was really creating like social media or blogs because they wanted to become famous, or because they wanted to build a media company, or because they wanted to become an influencer, or because they wanted to make money. People were doing it purely from a place of passion. So that's how it started for me. It wasn't, I had no idea what was going to happen in the world. And then, 6 months after I started writing, the iPhone came out. I think Facebook was still only available to college students. I think it had, 20, 30 million users. Twitter was a completely new phenomenon, and I started noticing people were sharing my articles on Twitter. So I signed up for a Twitter account and just monitored what people were saying. It was a time of great change. It was very exciting.
Yeah, it was really great time. I remember how at Czech Radio, we were on a station for young kids. There was like nothing, as you say. It was 2006, then 2007. And I was like, hey, there is this new thing, Facebook. Maybe we should have a profile there. And most of the people were like, oh, no, it's some nonsense. So I just started it, and then like a few months later, and a few years later. And so that's really a huge development. Do you think actually today, in this time, is it harder to do media on fashion? Or is it easier?
I think it's much harder. I mean, 20 years ago, there were so few voices in the fashion industry. So much of the conversation around fashion was dominated by a few big, gate-kept media companies, you know. Now, there's millions, tens of millions of people creating content about fashion. And therefore, it's quite noisy. And in order to really develop a voice that stands out, that builds a following, you have to be really, really differentiated. You have to have a really, really clear idea of your point of view, you know, the audience that you want to reach, you know, the way you're going to tell stories. So, you know, back when I started, you know, I think it was much easier because it was all new. That, you know, nobody was really, you know, creating, you know, their own content with the view of building anything. They were just creating it, as I said earlier.
Yeah, but it's
from a point of
interesting that
passion.
it seems like that you tapped it exactly already then. That you decided to do quality-based analysis, deep dive content, but targeted global. Was it like that from the beginning? Did you think about the big picture, global picture from the beginning, or not?
I wish I could say that I was very strategic about everything, but it was really a lot of luck. You know, and as I mentioned earlier, so like 6 months after I started, the iPhone came out, right? And so that meant that people weren't just able to look at my writing on a website or in a newsletter, they could look at it on their phone. And then the articles would get shared on social media and they would spread around. Like none of that I could have planned for. And yeah, it was global from the beginning, but I didn't plan for that either. You know, it's just the internet by definition was global. And a lot of the other people that were talking about the business side of fashion back then, there were regional publications. There were publications in the US or in France or in Germany, but nobody was really thinking about the global audience. And only after a few months when I started receiving media requests from Korea and from Hong Kong and from other places did I really realize, oh, there's people actually reading this, you know? So that was you know, an accident, you know? It wasn't a strategy.
That's a beautiful accident, and at the end, or like at the current situation of the accident, you have over 1.5 million unique visitors a month. That's a beautiful accident, I would say. It's not just an accident. And with this thing of like having a dream or like figuring out like, oh, this might be global, that's amazing. What were the breaking points, if you could just pick some 2 or 3, not all of them, but like some breaking points that you would like to mention that are important from today's view that helps you to make business of fashion the way it is today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been a 19-year journey, so I have to pick 3, right?
Or two.
Okay, so the first one, I had a friend named Mustafa, and he worked at Marks & Spencer in their tailoring department. And he was flying back on a plane from Milan. And he noticed that the woman, this was probably 2007 or 8, he noticed that the woman sitting next to him was reading a printout of my blog. So he tapped her on the shoulder and he said, you know, that's my friend's blog. And she said, well, I would like to meet him. So I ended up meeting this woman. Her name was Judy Tobias, a fellow Canadian. And she sat down with me and she taught me a really important lesson. She said to me, Imran, and this was the first time I met her. She said, Imran, I just want to tell you something. She said, your ideas are so interesting, but the way you're presenting your ideas, basically the design of your website or your blog, it's not at the same level as your ideas. And you're communicating in an industry where design and presentation and aesthetics are so important. You really need to up the ante on your design, because if it looks like this, a lot of people in fashion just won't pay attention because they can't get over the fact that it's ugly. And so she introduced me to a graphic designer who actually, I partnered with him to design the BOF logo, you know? So that was a real big turning point, because that was a really important lesson for me, that the way you present things in fashion is really important. And then maybe like 5 years later, I started getting some inbound investor interest. You know, I was at the time earning my living as a consultant. You know, I was an independent consultant. I would write BOF in the evenings, and I was advising a variety of different companies during the day to earn a living. And I thought BOF was my kind of, you know, I used to work at McKinsey, and they had this publication called the McKinsey Quarterly. And I thought BOF was my McKinsey Quarterly. It was the way of sharing my thinking and my ideas so that I could earn or gain interest in my consulting work, so that people would hire me to do consulting projects. But, you know, 2012, you know, some investors started approaching me. Actually, Condé Nast in New York approached me, because at the time they still owned Women's Wear Daily. So I had a conversation with them, and then another investor approached me, and then another investor approached me. And then I realized this little project I was doing at home on my sofa was actually, maybe it could be a business. You know, that's how I started thinking about BOF as a business. So that changed my mindset about BOF. So in 2013, that was another really big turning point, because I raised some investment to hire a team so I could build BOF into a company, hire, you know, people. But that was the first time I really set down a strategy. I said, okay, well, what could this be, you know? And at the time we had a brand, you know, we obviously had this authoritative voice, and we had a community. And those pillars are still the core pillars that kind of sit at the center of our business model today. So if you ask me about 2 inflection points, those would be 2 really important ones.
Perfect, thank you so much. Let's move forward to the current time now, and let's stay with the fashion business and media. This is the second part of the interview that is going to be about navigating fashion media in current world. What is the base of your business model today? Here in Czech Republic, people are getting used to pay for the media. We have a lot of subscribers on podcast platforms, also some written media. It's still a pretty new thing, but it seems to me more and more people, especially young people, are getting used to pay for membership, pay for their media. So if you could tell us about your business model, what works best for you, what is the challenges of membership, what is the advantages?
Yeah, of course. So when we raised the first round of funding, our initial goal wasn't really focused on revenue generation. It was focused on growing what was, at the time, a blog and a newsletter that went out once or twice a week, based on a very small number of contributors and me. So the first goal was like, how can we take it from an occasional once or twice a week newsletter into something that is like really a regular stream of content, you know? How can we grow the community from 200,000 or 300,000 visitors to more than 1 million visitors, right? And so for the first couple of years, we were really focused on that. And we started, you know, experimenting with different types of revenue models. You know, we did some sponsorship projects. We created this thing called the BOF 500. We had some sponsors for that. But very quickly, I began to realize that when you take money from advertisers, it can come with expectations, you know? And I didn't really want to have a business model that compromised our independence, because our independence, I think in the early days when I was writing, in part because I was so much of an outsider to the industry, I could say whatever I wanted. And I think that's why people really started to pay attention, because so much of the media was very cozy with the advertisers, with the industry, and their business was dependent on an advertising model. And very quickly it became clear that, one Christmas, it was, I think, December 2015, I do a lot of thinking over Christmas because, everything slows down. And I came back to my team in January and I said, I think the only way this is going to work and the only way we're going to build a business model that's sustainable is if we build a subscription business model. And I got a lot of resistance from our team. They didn't think we had a big enough audience at the time. Because you think about, when you think about a subscription business, you think about a funnel. And at every layer of the funnel, there's a conversion rate. And based on the prevailing conversion rates or the benchmarks that we could see, like our audience at the top of the funnel wasn't big enough to generate a meaningful amount of revenue. But I pushed really hard. And sometimes when you're the founder, you need to just set a vision and say, like, this is what we're going to do. We need to all get aligned around this. I just had a feeling that the conversion rates that they were benchmarking against, that our conversion rates would be higher. I just had a feeling, like, people by this point, BOF had been around for almost 10 years. We'd been giving free advice, free analysis, free information to, at that point, close to like 1 million people all around the world, And so I imagined that because people had developed a habit around opening this newsletter every morning, because they trusted it, because we were providing information and analysis you couldn't find anywhere else, that our conversion rates as you went down that funnel would be higher. So in August 2016, we let everybody know that in 2 months we were going to put up a paywall. And we had come up with the idea that we would let people know in advance so that if they signed up before the paywall went up, we would give them a 50% discount on the subscription. And inside the team, we started making bets. How many subscribers could we sign up before the paywall went up? And I think I had the highest guess. I guessed, I think, 1,000. 1,000 subscribers before the paywall went up. Well, actually, the day the paywall went up, we had 5,000 subscribers. And that really gave us such a boost of confidence. That happened on October 25th. We call that our day at BOF because even now there's an original cohort of members that we signed up on October 25th, 2016. And every year we pay really close attention because those are the people who signed up to BOF Professional at the very beginning. And so, we've built this business model where we're mostly accountable to our subscribers, to our members. And more than 2/3 of our business, 60% of our business is really based on that subscription model. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is events. We started doing an event called BOF Voices, also in 2016. That was a really big year for us. Last year, we did our 10th edition of BOF Voices in December. So this year, in December, it'll be our 11th edition. And since COVID, the events part of our business has been growing very, very quickly. We now do an event for the beauty industry. We do an event for the Global South called BOF Crossroads. And we have a big flagship gala event that we do during Paris Fashion Week for the BOF 500. So we have these 4 flagship events. But we do a ton of other smaller events. I think last year in total, we ran 40 different events all around the world. And we found that post-COVID, people just, like here today, people want to be in a space with other people. They want to have an opportunity to listen to speakers. They want to have an opportunity to meet other people. And so we really have built a whole events and experiential business that's exactly that. It's around sharing expertise, building community, and creating something that you can't get from a Instagram account or from a website. That it's about an experience. And I guess the third really important pillar that we have is around data and information. And so we've started building business models around AI. Before artificial intelligence, it was really hard to crunch large sets of data. So we've now started building tools that are taking massive data sets off the internet. The way people are engaging with brands on Instagram, the way they're talking about brands in Reddit and other areas in TikTok, in Little Red Book in China, in Weibo. And what we really do is we take all of these large data sets and we help brands understand the conversations happening around their brands. That was impossible before AI. Now with AI tools, we can take these data sets and make real sense of them. And so those are like the key verticals that we have. And then we're doing that in the fashion industry, we're doing that in the beauty industry, and increasingly we're focusing on the luxury industry. So yeah, there's a lot going on in our business model.
It's a great architecture. As you mentioned, and it's obvious, your audience is global. It's something that for me is hard to imagine, as I work always for the local media in my own Czech language, and I'm sure most of the people here also do that. But how do you approach it when you are talking to global audience? How do you work with it?
I realized early on that when you have a global publication and you have a voice that people trust, an authoritative voice, an independent voice, a voice that's considered, everything you do comes with a high level of accountability and responsibility. And so we think that one of our enduring differentiators at BOF is that we can report on our industry with a global voice. That's one of the reasons I accepted the invitation to come here, because we have readers, we have BOF professional members in 125 countries. In some of those countries, it's just 2 people, but we have an accountability to those readers, and so I'm very, very conscious of that. I'm aware that it comes with a sense of responsibility, that when we report on the fashion industry, we report with a global voice. And for a very, very long time, fashion media has been dominated by white, Western voices. I am not white. My background is not from the West. My family is from India. My parents are from East Africa. I grew up in Canada. My partner is Indian. So I look at the world really with a global view. It was really in my DNA because of my personal background that I never looked at the world from the lens of London or New York or Paris. My background, my upbringing, the way I was raised was as a third culture kid. A kid whose parents raised him in an Indian culture imbued with East African heritage. I went to a very international university in Canada, in Montreal. So I've been surrounded and been immersed in global environments since I was very, very young. And so that really helps me. We have a global team at BOF. We have something like more than 25 nationalities represented on our team. We have contributors all over the world. And so when you're trying to tell global stories and when you're reporting to a global audience, that exchange happens between a global team and a global community with a global mindset. And it helps that a lot of the growth in the fashion industry now is not happening in Western markets. It's happening in the global South. It's happening in countries like India, like in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in the Middle East, in Brazil. So we really have people based in all of these countries, contributors that are based in all of these countries, and a very clear remit to report on the industry. So if we're doing a story on retailers, we're going to talk about retailers in all of the parts of the world that we report on. And that's just how we work. It's in our DNA.
And I must say, it's very refreshing. It's super nice. Sorry, I have a little bit indisposition, but as you probably noticed, try to work through it, because now we are getting to the third part.
Okay.
And that's the most exciting and beautiful things in fashion and in luxury today. So let's start with this one. What do you think means luxury in fashion today? What is it that people find luxurious in fashion? What do they actually want when they want luxury in fashion?
I think luxury is so personal now. I think what luxury means to one person is completely different from what it means to another person. I think the word luxury is so overused. You can walk into the Marks and Spencer in London and find luxury biscuits, There's, luxury as a word has lost a little bit of its meaning. And so I think we're living in a time when people are surrounded with and kind of bombarded with messages around luxury. We're living at a time when the prices of, so many luxury products have increased significantly. And I think that means that everyone is thinking about luxury in their own way, and I think personalization, customization, luxury as something for me has become really, really important. So I don't think I can answer for every customer, but I think there's a few key themes that I would point out. One is that I think this idea of like mass-produced luxury at scale, luxury at an industrial scale, where there's an it bag and it gets put into an advertisement or it gets put on a celebrity and everyone wants the same bag, like that feels really old-fashioned to me. If you really talk to like the most discerning customers, they're looking for something really special that nobody else has. And so I think what that means is that the big brands that have raised their prices so much, that have become so inaccessible, it's opened up a really interesting opportunity for small, independent brands that are not making products in the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands. They're making products that are really, really special. So I think there's this kind of like, there's this whole thing about luxury for me. I think the other thing is, luxury has more expectations from customers in terms of how it's made and who makes it. The last 5 years has seen us kind of reckoning for luxury customers. We started hearing stories about the way things are being made, and even in the so-called made in Italy supply chains, we started hearing stories about, in quotation marks, luxury products being made in conditions that no luxury customer would find acceptable. We are hearing stories out of factories in Italy where products are being made in unconscionable conditions. So I think there's a lot more expectation that customers have today that if you're going to call something a luxury product, it needs to be made by people being treated well, made with materials that are sourced in an ethical way, in conditions from the beginning of the supply chain right to the end of the supply chain, that a brand can hold its head up high and say, yes, this was made properly, ethically, by people who are being treated well. And a lot of brands have had to have a reckoning recently because stories have come out about the way their products are being made that are not luxury, So I think, there's an element of personalization, there's an element of like customization, and there's also an element of ethics and sustainability around real luxury today. And so that means luxury is very different from, I think, the way some of the luxury brands are portraying luxury.
Yeah, as you mentioned, some of the big brands were really having quite a hard time, and I think they deserved it because of the way they produced their stuff. But still, The big brands are here. They have a huge space on the market. Do you think that today's big legacy brands handle to stay relevant? Who is doing it good, in your opinion? How do they navigate it, and who is handling it nice?
Yes, I mean, it's a really important question because, of course, after the post-COVID boom in luxury, when the industry was going at 15 or 20% per year, now the industry is shrinking. And when the market is shrinking, that means in order for companies to grow, they need to take market share from other people. They can't grow just because the whole sea, the tide is growing, you know? They need to grow because they're basically taking something away from another company. And I think what a lot of the brands realize is they became lazy. You know, ultimately, although I am a firm believer that fashion is a business, I am also a firm believer that at the root of fashion is creativity. Without creativity, the business doesn't work. And a lot of the brands got lazy. You know, they stopped spending time on being innovative, being creative. You know, luxury brands started to feel like merch. You know, it was just taking logos and plopping them onto sweatshirts and hoodies and baseball caps. And that doesn't feel real.
So who is doing it nice, was my question.
So yeah, the question is, you know, we had 15 different brands last autumn start with new designers. For me, I mean, the obvious answer, but for me, the real highlight has been to see what's happening at Chanel. The designer Mathieu Blasi is like a magical creative creature. I've had the honor of spending a bit of time with him. He spoke at Voices back when he was still at Bottega Veneta. And the way he's approached that brand with humanity, with creativity, with a real understanding of craftsmanship, and with a real sense of joy, like you just feel it. Yesterday I was in Bangkok, and we were in the airport, and we went to almost every store in the airport just to have a look. And the store that had the most energy, the store that felt the most exciting was Chanel, by far. Everything felt desirable, and it's because when you put joy into something, when you put real creativity into something, you can feel it when the product is sitting on the shelf. So that's, for me, the real standout right now. And based on what we're hearing in the market, that's what customers are responding to as well.
So do you think in today's world, does it make sense to start a new young fashion brand to come on the market? Because we see a lot of the young brands struggling with big brands just ripping their designs off like that in a very short time, and with their power of production and marketing, they can just roll them over very easy. Do you think that the young upcoming designers who want to start and bring something new, do they have a chance in today's business of fashion?
So I mentioned at the beginning that how I got into the fashion business was working on an incubator for young fashion designers. This topic of young businesses and small brands has been my passion point from the very, very start of my journey in fashion. And one of the things I learned early on is that 95% of fashion startups fail. Maybe 99% fail. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You just need to know that if you're going to go out and build a fashion business today, the chances of succeeding are very, very small. And yes, the environment, because the big brands have so much power, they have so much money, they control so much, that also has made it tougher. But don't forget what I said earlier, that because the big brands have become so boring, so lazy, so merchified, customers are looking for something different now. And it's the young, creative brands that can really do something special. You know, whenever I'm somewhere in the world, I'll see someone wearing something. I did earlier today. I'm like, that's beautiful. And the woman in the front there, she said, well, this is a Ukrainian designer. Everywhere I go in the world, I'll see something that I've never seen before. That's what people are looking for now. So if you can create something really special based on your personal experience, based on a technique or a story or creativity that comes from something special in you, or special in the environment that you grew up in, or special in the craftspeople that you have access to, that's the starting point. But it's only the starting point. Because without that creativity, yes, the business can't grow. But on top of that, you need so many other things to work out in order for a fashion business to succeed. But don't let that stop you. Just go in with your eyes wide open that most fashion businesses don't work out. You need the operations, you need the marketing, you need the understanding of the customer, you need capital, and you need a go-to-market strategy, which includes direct-to-consumer, which includes the wholesale market, and which includes your own stores. So there's so much you need to figure out. But I don't want to sit here and tell people not to give up on their dreams, because I'm working in my business today because I had a dream, and it worked out for me. It worked out. I mean, I'm working at the intersection of fashion and media, and the media industry is really challenging as well. So I'm not going to sit here and tell people not to go and try. You just need to try going in with your eyes open that it might not work, right? And you have to be really, really aware of all of the obstacles and challenges that are in your way. But it's a beautiful industry, the fashion industry, and I'm really, really lucky to be a part of it. So I'm really, really grateful to be part of it.
And we are very grateful that you are part of this event. Thank you so much, Imran, for the interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much.